She has emerged as a young and zealous voice in the human rights and justice movement. Her experiences as a former Oxford University's Student Union president has brought forth a need to critically examine liberty and inclusivity in educational institutions all across the world. She is well aware of the human rights violations and targeted discrimination and harassment of Indian identities and intellectuals. This is an excellent opportunity to investigate into her life experiences and learn from her story. She writes for Firstpost, Sunday Guardian, The Times of India, to name a few, and has appeared on national and international news portals like CNN News 18, Republic World, Times Now, India Today, among others. She is a fierce, civilisationally assured, self-respecting, brave Indian. She is Rashmi Samant. Rashmi ji, on behalf of Rashtram School of Public Leadership, I'm happy to welcome you here at Rishihood University. It is indeed a great privilege to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much for having me and the very kind introduction.
How have your experiences of growing up in India, the familial, social, cultural factors shaped you as a person?
I think there's a bit of a background there and a bit of history. So if you want to get into that, I come from a place called Udupi in India. So it's in the western coast of southern India. So it's in Karnataka. It's along the beach. There's both beaches and mountains. It's that kind of beautiful place. And it's home to the famous Krishna temple. And that's where Madhvacharya started his journey. He's from there. He started he installed the Sri Krishna Murti there. So that's where I come from. And Udupi has always been this place that was shielded from, say, Mughal invasion due to the staunch sort of resistance put up by the Vijayanagara Empire, and also from a lot of the colonial atrocities as well, because of the presence of the Wadeyar family. So we've always been very well shielded from what maybe the rest of India was going through from time to time. So I think that helped in the preservation of the deep sort of civilizational value and the Hindu identity that's so rich and deep rooted in this country, and that was always there around me, undiluted by time, undiluted by invaders, undiluted by pillages. So that essence was always there, and also the many stories that I heard growing up. My great-grandmother, she was the one who moved in with us when I was born. It was not my grandmother, because my mom was still young and my great-grandmother was still pretty much a typical grandmother's age. So she didn't study much. I think she barely went to school. She probably must have been to primary school. But I think our civilization has come through stories and, songs which were passed from generations to generations. And I think some of my first learnings were through those songs and through stories that she told me, undiluted through, history, through propaganda and all of the colonial lens that sought to distort what we stand for and what we signify. So I think that is what really defines me and defined a better part of my childhood. That's where I find my roots, and that's where I find my energy to go from day to day. It's those stories, the cradle stories, that I still carry with me. And I think it also brings a sense of clarity in everything that you want to do, achieve, because you've had that clear logical sense to everything that your civilization signifies. Not the sort of colonial rhetoric that, oh, this is superstitious. No, there's so much logic to everything that we do. There's so much scientific logic to everything that you do. And learning in that true sense, I think that is what growing up in India, in Udupi, signifies for me. That is what life has been for me, growing up here.
Have you been able to acquire, with all of these experiences, a distinct cultural identity? Would you say that?
I think, calling it an identity is separating yourself from everyone, saying that, oh, you're different from others. I don't think I'm different from others. I think we're all the same fundamentally. And I think what I've been taught essentially is to be kind, to always tell the truth, to always help others, to always share what you've got. It is it is basically what the Hindu way of life is. So I think that did not separate me from others. That did not give me a distinct identity. Rather, it taught me how to live more harmoniously as a society, to integrate myself no matter where I went. So I've traveled the world quite extensively, actually, almost been to 25 countries, but I never found this difficulty integrating anywhere, because I could always find beauty in every culture, because I think that is what the Hindu way of life is. It's about appreciating everything. It's about going above and beyond. It's about seva. It's about paropakara. So I think that's what's been, and I don't think that differentiated or gave me any distinct identity that made me separate from, everybody else. Rather, it made me a very integrated part of this, world that we live in.
Thank you for clarifying that, because we live in a world where identities become very personal, and they do tend to cover up the entire person, whereas the way you put it shows that it's not necessarily so, and that especially for the identity, the person that you are, the culture that you come from, it's very different. Can we take a deep dive into, or a post facto analysis of what actually happened at Oxford University? How was the process of becoming the student union president first, if you would?
So, okay, where do you want me to start? Because I think this is a story I've told many times.
Right.
But of course, I wouldn't mind repeating it as many times I have to be heard.
Yeah.
So, I think as a child, I've been very ambitious. I come from a small city, but I think a small city is a misnomer for this slow, steady life. No, I think I've had a great upbringing where just sky was the limit, the clear skies that we had, that was the limit. And I've always had this in me to always go to the best university, get the best things in the world, because I never thought of myself as deserving of anything less. So the University of Oxford, when I was a little child, I did hear someone saying, oh, the University of Oxford is the best university in the world. And I was like, okay, one day I'm going to go study there. It was this little childish obsession, which later on, grew into a more specific goal that, okay, I have to achieve this. So then I went there. And being an active part of the community, taking leadership roles, has been something integral to my persona, taking the lead, taking initiative, sort of saying things that others might be shy to say or to put out. And I've been that way since kindergarten. I was always leading these little groups of children to say, oh, we want this, we don't want that. And, I've been a class leader since very young. Ever since I could find my voice, I've been a sort of a leader, for class or a group or a club or a house. So I've always taken up those roles. So it doesn't necessarily stem from having to adhere to a particular ideology or to this thing. It comes from a sense to, give voice to people who don't necessarily, find that for themselves, and to represent, to take that initiative. Because I think a lot of people find that hard to take that initiative. So it comes from that sense. And I've always done that on multiple campuses that I've been in. So I've done that in school, where our problems were about the mess food and, things like that. And having maybe extra washrooms built, having, say, more time with, PT hours, because we all wanted to go out and play, and have less of these academic hours. So those were the representations I initially made. And then growing up, I think I was also a leader during my undergraduate days at my engineering institute. So I was an elected leader there. I think that's where sort of a little bit of electoral politics got into. I've also been very fearless in voicing my opinions. So I think that is also part of the charm that sort of gets me into these positions from time to time. So yeah, I think I've always been an active leader, an active student leader through and through. So when I got on Oxford, I was like, hey, academics is just a very small part of my life. What else can I do to explore this campus, be more active, just live the campus life to the fullest? And then I heard about the Students' Union, and that they have these presidential elections every year. And it's a huge, humongous task, because there the people that you represent come from every corner you can imagine of this world. So it's almost like having a world parliament, people from everywhere are there and you're supposed to represent them. And that was such a big challenge in itself that I think part of the reason why I stood up for that election was I wanted to put myself out of my little comfort zone and see what it really means to like go out there and, take up that challenge of representing so many diverse voices. And I think coming from India gives me that edge because I come from a country which has managed to find unity in so much diversity. I mean, I come from South India and we're culturally so distinctively different from maybe the North, but our traditions has wound us together because our ethos have been same. It's about seva and helping each other. So that kept us together. Right. So I thought that kind of background would maybe, has trained me the best to represent a society where people come from different parts of the world. If, I thought that was translated there. And they've never had an Indian president. So they're 900 years old, 900 odd years old. They're going to turn 1,000 years old in a few years. So I thought, hey, about time they had an Indian president. So yeah, I did run the election. It was quite challenging because I was just on campus for 5 months. The other contestants have been there for 3 years. They've been doing longer courses and they had been there during the non-COVID times as well. So more socializing. When I got on campus, it was COVID times. So all of our in-person interactions have been cancelled and I barely knew 20-25 people. So it was a challenge in itself to campaign through those restrictions, to not know a lot of people, but still make enough headway. And I think, when you've got your heart in the right place, people start resonating with your ideas. And that's how I won the election and created history as the first Indian to win that election. And it was a landslide margin, never seen before margin. And I think they had the highest voter turnout ever in their history. So that happened. So it was a challenge in itself, but I think we need to constantly put ourselves out of our comfort zones to make that exponential learning curve happen in our lives. We will only learn if we do things that we don't know. Comfort zone come from doing things you know the way to school, doing this, doing that, how to be a good student, how to be that. But then I didn't know how to be the president, and that gave me so much learning in itself, that exponential curve. So I think it's constantly necessary for us, not just in leadership roles, but otherwise in life, to put ourselves out of our comfort zones. Otherwise, we're just going to end up not learning and kind of segmenting there, like, how rocks kind of sediment by the end of the day in a pot full of water. You need to keep churning.
What happened immediately after? How did it turn?
So, I mean, I won. There was so much happiness. All of my supporters were very happy. And I think I had support from different quarters of the student community. It was great to be able to represent so many people. But I think there was also a part of the society which has always been there, the darker side, who is not very happy with the fact that I was their president, and they wanted to pull me down, obviously. And then they resorted to bullying, to harassing, to making my identity the problem there. So I think there are stereotypes about identities, no matter how much we'd like to deny the fact that we're all same and that there's no difference and that we need to be more of an equal society. We try to push that by segmenting ourselves very differently, and that leads to stereotypes, and these stereotypes are somehow ingrained in people's psychologies very deeply. And the moment someone's accused of someone's stereotypically I'm brown, I come from India, I've got Asian features, I'm a Hindu. So that is a lot of, stereotypes bang in there. I mean, Hindus have been stereotyped as cow-piss drinkers, dot heads, as whatnot, as infidels, as kafirs. So many things we've been labeled as, we've been villainized from time to time with no substantial thing. I mean, what have we done? Nothing. We've been the most peaceful community that has welcomed refugees from everywhere across the world. Any community you can imagine, we've welcomed here. We've welcomed them here in Bharat, and we have never persecuted anybody. Despite that, we've been villainized, and these stereotypes are so ingrained psychologically among people, especially in the West, that it's easy to villainize someone who looks like me or has the background that I do, though I refuse to see it as a separate identity. I do believe that we are an integral part of this world. And despite that, they want to put us into these boxes, put labels on it, put, identities on it, and bring the whole package of stereotypes that weigh it down. And mainstream media has been discriminatory against this identity, against Hindus, against this identity that they've created, that they've labeled themselves. And you can see news archives that so many of the articles that cover our plight have always somehow ended up making us look like the villains. You can take the Bangladesh massacre that happened very recently during the Durga Puja in 2021. Yeah. Hindus were mercilessly killed. And that was reported in the BBC as violence breaks during a Hindu festival, almost making it look like Hindus were themselves responsible for that violence, instead of saying Hindus attacked, minority Hindus attacked, because they are a minority. They are just 8% of the Bangladeshi population, and it has steeply dropped over the past few years. You can see over the past 10 years, there has been a sharp drop in their population. Minority Hindus, hate crime, minority Hindus subjected to violence during Durga Puja, during the most pious time for their religion. No. They want to make it look like violence breaks out during a Hindu festival. So there's bias, there's discrimination. So all of this kind of added up, and it was like a pressure cooker willing to burst, because this has been happening for way too many years before me, because it's been happening to Hindus. Yeah. These labels, everything. So it's been a pressure cooker. And I just happened to be there. And then it just burst. And the student community, there was a specific faction which was targetedly bullying me, creating multiple anonymous accounts on the go and harassing me everywhere, sending a lot of threats. And then there were campus rumor mills. We've got a few campus newspapers who can just about get away with publishing anything and everything. They've been sued to the ground before, but then that does not hinder them from spewing more such things. Then there were campus rumor mills, and this was being taken up and amplified by other, news outlets. I think every country has its fair share of news outlets who like to spice things up beyond proportion and see beyond facts. These were then taken up by them, and before long, I was made to look like this villain, this 21st century quintessential villain who hated the community, and that, who was ultra fascist. Do nothing, and then suddenly your identity becomes the problem. So that's what happened to me. And I had to fight day in and out to prove them wrong. For the first 10 days, I was just numb, because I think I never expected this to happen. Coming from such a cohesive and inclusive society, you would never, if you have that certain level of innocence in you that, unless you do something wrong, nothing wrong is going to happen to you, because you believe in karma. But then all of this happens to you. So then you start internalizing it a little bit. But then it took me a fair share of time to sort of stop internalizing these accusations, see what is going on, and tell my story for what it is. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. The first time I told my story, nobody wanted to hear the story, plainly because they were so blinded by the, by the rhetoric that was out there, because it's a rhetoric that you keep listening about Hindus. So when there's another rhetoric, it's easy to believe that, because you tell a lie 100 times, then it starts sounding like the truth. So there's already a rhetoric against the Hindus, and I was just the fresh rhetoric there. So it was easier to believe that over me, because all those rhetorics checked all the boxes which were already being established over a period of time. So it was difficult for me to get people to see beyond the rhetoric that they used to kind of see my story. But then I think I'm also not the one to give up. So I repeated my story as many times as it took for the people to finally hear it. And when they did start hearing it, I think it resonated on so many different levels. And I think truth has its way of coming out, though maybe it takes a lot of time for some cases, though it takes a lot of, it faces a lot of challenges, but then it does come out. So I think it's fundamental to Hinduism, Satyameva Jayatena.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
So amidst all of these injustices, did you see some kind of ray of hope as a justice that came out in any form of was there an investigation?
There was an official investigation. So the university was forced to do an investigation into the matter. The police was forced to investigate, the institutions were forced to introspect, and then they did come out with the findings which were in my favor. They did say that I was bullied and harassed, and that was it. I think that is also something that I had to come to terms with, that the experience that I went through cannot be undone just because someone says that, okay, you were bullied. That is also a burden that you will have to carry and undo yourself, because there's no amount of words or papers that can finally, or any kind of action that can undo the trauma that you do go through when you're being harassed in a certain way. So I think that was also part of the learning curve, but I think I'm glad that I put up that fight, because it taught me that if you stand for your truth, then nobody can defeat you. And I think there was a point when people were like, oh, your career is over because your background checks are all, going to come up with all of these serious accusations. But then I proved them wrong. I took my job at the British Parliament, and they've got the strictest background checks ever. And I passed it all, and I proved them wrong that, see, my truth held up. So, they can't ruin someone's life based on their prejudices and ill intent. So, yeah.
How do you perceive the same kind of struggle for other Hindus or Indians in educational spaces across the world? How do you see, what are the struggles that they have? What perception do you have about that?
I think there is a lot of struggle that stems from discrimination, and there is a strong level of discrimination, but we've chosen not to use that word because of the self-respecting community that we are. We keep saying bias, we keep saying hypocrisy. Oh, what's this hypocrisy? This issue is covered and ours is not. What is this hypocrisy? It's not hypocrisy, it's plain discrimination, and that's the challenge that we are up against. You're going to end up being harassed, being traumatized, and after that you're going to end up telling your story with nobody willing to listen. I think there's nothing more heartbreaking than that. The Kashmiri Pandits, there's I think one Pandit who wrote almost 6,000 letters to the Indian government over a period of almost 32 years, and to not be heard. I mean, have your entire family butchered in front of you, and look for justice, and have no one believe you, have nobody absolutely believe you. I think that is the challenge that we have. We're not just given bad treatment, we're also silenced, and we're boycotted. I think boycott is another big problem that we see. Academics who are proudly Hindu, who try to bring up our side of the arguments, we're just shunned. There's just door shut. In this world that claims to be liberal, to be open, there's so much restriction on freedom of speech. People are just deplatformed left, right and straight. How is this society liberal? So there are all these fancy labels with great meanings that are being weaponized to silence some voices and amplify others. This is the challenge that we're up against. And I think growing up, these labels are reinforced so strongly that we tend to believe that more often than not, these are our perceptions, that the world is truly liberal. It's not. They just call it liberal while people are getting deplatformed left, right and straight for standing for what they believe in. So I think that is the biggest challenge that we are currently facing, and we've been facing for a really long time. I think with the advent of social media, it's much easier. You can still make your video, though nobody wants to platform you, and put it up somewhere on the internet that can perhaps get picked up, perhaps not picked up, but you still have that power to put your voice out there. But before that, I mean, can you imagine the media? Everything was decided, what's going to be on the media, what's going to be printed, what's going to be amplified, what's not. You would be restricted to the silo of your own mind and your own voice, and not have that power to amplify your things. So I think Hindus before us, before me at least, the generations before have had it much worse. And so many stories have been lost in the tide of time, just because nobody, silencing was, I think silencing the voice is worse than, it's imperative to sort of finishing the entire civilization off. So that is what happened to us. So, yeah.
In terms of approaching the challenge head on, trying to find out solutions to this, I would like your thoughts on that. But before that, do you feel there's a need to reinforce a boundary and assert a boundary. You must have heard of the concept of boundary setting in psychology. It's a healthy practice. So would you say that as a community, we need to assert our boundaries a little more?
I think a boundary is a separatist word, to be honest. I think as a community, I think what makes the Hindu community beautiful is that we are giving and we are accepting of all. And no, we don't want to set a boundary, but we do want to assert ourselves strongly. And I think it's also important to understand Hindu human rights for that. I mean, you've all heard human rights. Then why is the word Hindu human rights so new to you? So new to everyone? You've heard of human rights, right? Hindus are humans too. So don't we have our rights? See what's happening to Hindus in Pakistan. They're being forcefully converted. The girls are being tortured. They're being forced to, because that's what they think it is. It's without the men, with the women. That's how brutal it is. And that's their slogan. What's happening to Hindus in Bangladesh? What's happening to Hindus across, countries where they're a minority? What happened to Hindus in Afghanistan? What happened to them? They're gone now. They're gone. They're absolutely gone. And what's happening to Hindus in different countries like Fiji and Suriname, where they were taken as bonded laborers by the colonial masters, and after independence, they're still being treated as second-class citizens, despite having 2-3 generations set up there. Can you imagine? You're at home now because for the past 3 generations, this has been your country. But legislatively, you can never be the president of the country because there's a strong bias against you out of your religion. I heard this very, sad story, I think, about someone from around that region. He tells me that I asked him, okay, what's your name? And it was a Christian sounding name. And I was like, oh, you're from India. And, I met them at one of these Tirth Yatras. So you're at a Hindu Tirth Yatra. Wow. Like, what motivated you? So he had tears in his eyes. He told me that children born to Hindu families were considered illegitimate. So they had to convert to even inherit the property of their parents. Because that was it. The Hindu way of life was nowhere institutionalized and it was not allowed. You would be an illegitimate child if you were the child of a Hindu couple. So you wouldn't inherit anything from them. You would inherit nothing, like no property, no home. You would be that kind of discrimination. Could you imagine? Just because your religion is different, you're suddenly illegitimate in this world. You have no rights. You have no identity. I think identity is again a misnomer, but who are you? There's this no you. So yeah, I think that was there, and this needs to be understood. And I think it's a big journey because this needs to be understood and this needs to be asserted. We need to speak more loudly, more clearly, and not come under the pressure of mainstream narratives to hide our stories. Just because the people think that, that your stories are not valid does not make it any less valid. So that is something that we need to understand and, sound our stories even more loudly.
How would you describe your approach to Hindu human rights activism?
I think my approach is the one that's the approach that's required currently. So I've been trying from time to time to, reach out to institutions, to institutionalize the rights of Hindus, to institutionalize stories where we have been discriminated, to give platform to many others who've not had that platform before. So that's there, amplifying voices. So I think it's still new because it's until a few months ago, I was oblivious to this. Had it not been my own experience, I wouldn't have read into so much that's been happening to the community. So I think it's still something new and evolving, but for me, it's always about giving platform to more stories and empowering them in any way that I can, in any way. So I think recently we had a fundraiser for someone who actually lost their life due to their activism. So we do a lot of this. So it's all about supporting and creating a cohesive environment for others to come up and, tell their stories. So that's been, Hindu human rights for me.
Could you share some more of the positive impact of your work through anecdotes, some stories?
So I think to know of the impact of my stories, it all starts from a very sad story because, everywhere there's just so much discrimination, there's so much I think it goes beyond that. It goes into hate crimes. It goes into so many other things. But I think we've had certain winnings for sure. I think there's a very personal story. So there was a person, I think, there are many people who follow me socially, but then I do interact with some people from time to time. There's someone who used to interact with me through an anonymous account, and he told me of this story of how he was wearing a red thread on his wrist. He's a young professional outside India and used to wear a red thread to work, and how people would look down upon him and think of it as a superstitious practice and discriminate, in the sense, treat him as a lesser human for just having a lal, thread around his wrist. And how he decided to cut it off and to kind of sublimely this thing. But then he told me that he came across my story and that he was proud. And then I told him that, you can make me prouder by actually starting to wear that thread again and not minding, what the others think. And then he did. And then he put his head up high and he found a self-respect back at his workspace. And he was able to, do what, be equally a human and more so, in every sense in his workspace, and assert himself as no less than anybody else, because the story gave him that sense. And I think that is something very personal, and it was a very small thing that I did. But apart from that, we've done a bunch of fundraisers from time to time to support families that go through hardships just because of the discrimination that they come across. I mean, you get boycotted, you're out of a job, you're out of everything in society. So we've from time to time, try to support them as well. It's nothing I'd like to go in detail about, because it's nothing, it's nothing great that I'm doing. It's something everybody should be doing.
It's the need of the hour.
It's the need of the hour. There's no greatness attached to it. It's not a noble thing. It's something you should be doing for God's sake, because I think that is what, the end goal of your life, right? To just lead a life where you've managed to create value for others around you. It's not about, promoting yourself to an extent that, that the society, there's no society left. It's about, kind of creating value for others. I think that makes life all the more meaningful, and that's the core essence of our way of life.
You've spoken a little bit about this, but in particular, I'd like to ask you, do you think there are any specific misconceptions about the Hindu ways of being, doing, and knowing?
Where do I start? I think there's a lot of misconceptions, and there are more misconceptions than truths out there, especially exacerbated by colonial lenses, by, Islamic invasion lenses. They've rewritten a lot of our ethos in ways that is not us. They as infidels, as superstitious people, by masking the scientific reason behind what we do and why we do, and by labeling us for everything that we do, for every single thing, including the bindi. So yeah, I think there's been misconceptions about everything, and it just keeps growing, and the better parts are just appropriated very badly abroad. Yoga is appropriated. It's appropriated into the wellness industry so much that there's no spiritual essence left of it, and no due credit given to the Hindus who brought yoga to the world. So I think everything good has either been misconceived or appropriated. And you can find examples, I think, too many examples out there. And I think it's up to Hindus to set that right. Who else, right, has that responsibility, has that on them to reset that. So I think it's, by the end of the day, it's our responsibility. No matter how much of an impact we are able to have, it's still something. So it's these tiny drops that will finally make our ocean.
So there is the need.
There is the
pressing need to sensitize the global community about.
Yes, you can see it around you everywhere. In the adverts that you see, in the movies that you see, in the mainstream media, in people's words, in people's statements, in people's opinion of the Hindu. So you can see it there.
Could you describe some key people and institutions whose work in the area of Hindu human rights from around the world, which has been inspiring, which has probably empowered you even during your struggle?
I think it's a very small community. It's a very close community, but I think I've always found people who are, like-minded, who are good. And I think my greatest source has been my own family to kind of keep me up, to keep me rooted to that sense. But I think that is the thing, right? We Hindus are not individuals. We are the community, and we learn from, and we take that inspiration from everywhere around us, from you, from everybody. So I think that is by the end of the day, it's not one single leader that you take inspiration from. It's from the whole community on a daily basis that you take inspiration, that you learn from. And I think I'm truly grateful that I'm a part of this sort of way of life and this community that it's built, and no other.
What support, if any, do you require from, would you say you would require from academics, intellectuals, from thinkers in India? What kind of support do you think that?
I think the only support anybody in this field would want is to be heard, is to be heard. So just take off your, narrow lenses and probably see around you. And if you've got any misconceptions, then maybe just listen. That's the only thing, I think, by the end of the day. Just listen. Not just to me, but to anybody who's got a story, who's trying to, come out through something, who's stand up for someone you see around you. I think you can probably choose to just be with someone on your campus around you, and that will somehow add to the whole momentum. It's this entire thing is not centered around me, and it never will be, and it never should be. It's centered around all of us who form the communities. I think it's all about listening to each other, about helping each other on a daily basis. And I think that is what I want. I want them to listen more to the people around them. I want them to be more open-minded and to focus more on the truth and sort of break free finally from those colonial chains that have imprisoned us for so long.
It's fantastic. Any question that you think that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything, but do feel free to ask anything if anything pops up to your mind.
How hopeful are you? Is hope a good word? How hopeful are you looking at the scenario today from your lens, from the kind of, you've got a broad spectrum view on the current affairs. You come frequently on the television platforms and do voice your opinions on so many subjects. How hopeful are you for the cause that you're fighting for?
I think it takes reckless optimism to be, in a position that I am in, to go through the trauma of, being accused of something you've never done based on an identity that's been imposed on you by the colonial lens, that's constructed upon you. And to finally break through that takes reckless optimism. And I think that is something I carry every day with me. And I would just want that to continue, and for me to just get inspired every single day to go on with that sense of reckless optimism. So, yeah.
That's very nice. Could we add that into our academic syllabus here?
Yeah, sure.
Reckless optimism.
Reckless optimism. We can totally have an open elective on reckless optimism.
Anything you hope to see from public leaders? Since we are at Rashtram School of Public Leadership, we are trying to build the public leaders of tomorrow. Anything you hope to see in them?
Reckless optimism.
And
the hunger to create change. To never become complacent with the way of life if you do not fully believe it. I think it's important for us to hear our inner voice and not listen to what, people are trying to bombard you with, label you. Because that's not how we are going to move forward as a society. If you look at the history of our society for the past 200, 300 years, it's just bloodied papers. It's just been bloodied waters. It's been very bad. So you don't want to reinvent the wheel by listening to what's been told. Instead, listen to your own voice and have the hope and the optimism that that's going to create the change. So do not try to fit into any existing labels or boxes because, this is the framework and this is the end of it. No, Frameworks are created by people just like you and me. And these frameworks probably come from people's conceived notions, from people's stereotypes, from maybe perceived identities. No, you're completely different from these boxes, from these frameworks. Tap into that. Tap into that and create that positive change that our society so badly needs. So badly needs. Because I think we all need to move from chaos towards, towards a more peaceful society. But we are not. Every box and every label that we are shutting ourselves into is just creating more separatist groups that just finds more reasons to have friction with each other than unity, than having these things. I think that is the need of the hour.
To step out of the box.
To step out of the box, to break those labels. No, these labels were given to you. You're much bigger than that, and you need to listen to yourself to actualize that. And I think spiritualism does help, because spiritualism is all about concentrating your thoughts, right? It's logical. It's not illusion. It's not Maya. It's not magic. It's just better training your mind to focus on things. So yeah, concentrate your spirit, get your spiritualism together, gather your thoughts together, and create that change out there, because we so desperately need it. Break those labels.
The theories on decoloniality do speak about the freedom to define oneself as a colonized society. When they decolonize, they choose how they want to be seen. So isn't that somewhere overlapping with what you're trying to say?
No, I think that is not what decolonization means. So decolonization is the platform I ran my entire presidential campaign on. It's about plainly listening to the truth of what happened during colonialism and how we were broken as a society. Our fabric was broken, because that itself has been lied about out there. What are you going to define when everything that you believe is a lie out there? Get those stories out. I mean, we still celebrate Cecil Rhodes on Oxford campus. That man was a colonial, marauder, for God's sake. And when you believe these are your perceived truths, what are you going to define, for God's sake? So, decolonization is about breaking those chains of what you're being told, that this was colonization. At Oxford, for God's sake, I was told that colonization was a positive experience for indigenous people because it civilized them.
Ridiculous.
No, we weren't living in the jungles before the British came. We were a civilized society contributing to 25% of the world's GDP, and it's proven. It's not myth. It's not a myth. There's this proper evidence of this. I'm speaking facts here. So, and then we were reduced to 3% in just 100 years from 25%. So, that is decolonization. So, decolonization currently is being told as, oh, okay, so you've come out of this colonial rule. How do you define yourself? Who are you? No. You are trying to, we've been put into these labels. We've been packaged into things. We've been fed so many lies. Breaking away from that is decolonization. Achieving our true potential is decolonization. Putting ourselves into another set of labels is not going to achieve that.
Okay.
So I think that to me is decolonization. Is reconquering our true sense, our true selves, regaining that self-respect, regaining what we truly had as a society, as a community. And not putting ourselves into these shells of, based on what the British did to us. Because we have a much bigger history, much larger history. And that is what defines us. And reclaiming that is what decolonization is. And cutting this 100 years off. And the sufferings and those experiences and those lies. And, that way of doing. Cutting that off. And gaining that other sense of being is what we should be doing.
Thank you, Rashmi. This has been enlightening.
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thank you for having me.